Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this Chelsea Football Club special Rainbow Laces panel event this evening. We're delighted you can join us, and we're delighted as a club to be celebrating, as we do every year, the Rainbow Laces campaign, which looks to celebrate, include and welcome the lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender community in football across the game. My name is Chris Gibbons. I'm delighted and feel very privileged to be chairing this panel event tonight, and I shall introduce you to our speakers this evening. We have, I'm sure, be very recognisable to many, if not all of you, Graham Lasseau, former Chelsea and England international, joining us to talk about his experiences of the game, the good, the highs, the lows. We've also joined by a current player, Peniel Harder. Hi, Peniel, good to see you, who's joined the club this season. We're also joined by Sarah Matthews, the Director of HR for the club. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
And last but definitely not least, Funky Awaderu, my old boss, who is the Senior Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Manager at the FA. So thank you so much, all of you, for giving up your time in what is a turbulent year for everybody. And we're delighted you've been able to find the time to join us this evening to have a bit of an informal chat about what Chelsea's doing to create an inclusive club for LGBT plus people, and what the game is doing more widely, where we've come in the last 5-10 years, and what we want to be doing in the future. I've got some questions I want to put to all of you, but I'd like to keep it really informal, so please do feel free to chip in, respectfully debate with each other at any time. I'm more than happy to hand over to you. And I thought, if we start with where we've come from, Graham, I wanted to kick off with you, if you don't mind. And I know you've been asked about your experiences a lot, and you've talked very honestly, candidly and openly about the homophobia that you experienced as a player and how that impacted on your career. A lot of that came, I suppose, from what were perceived as acceptable, and I say that in massive inverted commas, acceptable hobbies and interests for pro footballers, particularly for pro male footballers. Do you think those stereotypes still exist, or has the game moved on since those times when you really experienced those awful experiences on the pitch? How was it, and what's happening now?
Well, I think the game has moved on massively. Society's moved on enormously as well. And football, as we always say, represents elements of society, the good and the bad. So, going back all those years now, and you look at sort of, my career as a bit of history now, given that I retired sort of 14, 15 years ago, what was going on, even from when I started in the late 80s to when I retired in 2005, the game was changing. It was catering much more for the individual, as opposed to, I think, a stereotypical sort of ideal of what a footballer should be, both on and off the pitch, what a team player looked like. And that was someone that conformed to a set of criteria, I suppose, that, sat in a box. And it took lots of different people through generations to push that envelope and to change perceptions and to challenge, I suppose, the issues that many people face, whether that was race, whether that was sexual orientation, and lots of other things along the way, sexism. So all forms of discrimination have existed in football, and gradually, we've moved much more towards a world of accepting difference, celebrating it as we do through Rainbow Laces and other fantastic campaigns, but also making people more accountable for what they say and do to other people. And I think that whilst there's always work to be done, I think we're in quite a good place in terms of in the dressing room and players understanding education and acceptance that we can all be team players, but all have very different ideas about life and have different sexual orientation without that being seen as something that should be challenged. So, just to reiterate, there's a huge amount that you always have to do. But I have to say, through all the stakeholders, all the work that's being done, I think we're in a much, much better place now, and we'll continue to do that. We've definitely turned that corner.
I mean, I remember from what I read about your experiences and from the conversations you and I have had in the past as well, there were three things which really stood out. There was the fact that you were a Guardian reader, I believe, you collected antiques and had a university degree, and it was determined, it was deemed that those weren't traditional hobbies and lifestyle choices for male footballers. But you can't have been the only professional male footballer who had those interests, who had those background experiences. Why do you think you were particularly in the spotlight at the time?
It's hard to say, really. I think that people sort of will naturally, in such a competitive environment, whether that's within a dressing room or from fans themselves of away teams, they'll have a little dig at players just to see if there's any weaknesses in them in terms of if they react. And I was quite feisty, you might remember, as a player. So I would defend myself. I would defend other people if I felt they were being intimidated or bullied. I've been on a pitch where teammates have been racist to somebody, and I would stand up against my own teammates a couple of times when I heard that, because I think I've always had a strong sense of who I am and a strong sense of what's right and wrong, and I could never sit back and just let something happen without intervening. And I think that's a responsibility for us all to do that. Now, that's easier said than done in some situations, because there are times when you're the only voice. But I think over time that's changed. And like I say, football players now are much more individual in terms of they're much happier to talk about their interests, whatever that's in. So this stereotype is shattered, thankfully. And we're looking for more. We're looking for more from people than just somebody that sort of sits in a box. We want people to talk about their interests and what they like, what makes them different. And I think that's a huge shift in society.
And that actually brings me on, Funky, to the work that the game has been doing over the last 5-10 years. I remember when I used to work for you at the FA, we kind of, this was a long time ago, we used to sort of say the acronym LGBT quite tentatively, or talk about lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender inclusion with a bit of apprehension. Now we talk about it the same way we talk about all forms of inclusion and discrimination in the game. What would you say have been some of the key sort of successes or milestones in the past 5-10 years that have really contributed to us being able to talk about these identities in the same way we talk about all identities and discrimination?
Yes, I think Graham has actually teed it up very nicely in terms of societal change and attitudinal change. Yes, you are right. 5-10 years ago, we were in a very difficult place. And when I say we collectively within the game, football, we weren't having the conversations. There wasn't the visibility. There was no sense of pride or celebration or recognition of differences. And if that differences was highlighted, it was always in a negative light rather than one that we should celebrate and connect with our differences, because it's through that diversity of mixes in who we are and our makeup that makes us richer, and a richer game and a richer sport and a richer team. So certainly I think what's happened over incrementally, because there's nothing as an overnight success, particularly when you're trying to shift attitudes. What has happened is that we find ourselves in a place where, whilst there is still more work to do, we recognize that actually, as a collective and through a much more coordinated, coherent approach, we've normalized the conversation. I use the word normalize in inverted commas because, one shouldn't have to feel that one has to normalize something which should be sort of a human construct. But people are very comfortable now. If anything, I think there's this real sense of pride whenever it comes around to rainbow laces. Each year, every club, regardless of the level of the game, they're really raising their game and really genuinely and in an authentic way, sending a real message of support and allyship. So I think it's one that actually it's a less toxic space in terms of not knowing what to do. And I think there's greater education, and I think there's a sense of pride of wanting to support something for the greater good.
You used a really key word there about taking pride in this work, and I think so that brings me really neatly to what I wanted to ask Sarah, and the pride with which and the serious with which the club takes all of this work. The Chelsea Football Club was recently awarded the advanced level of the Premier League's equality standard, and Sarah was at the fore of that, making that happen. And that was all about not just looking at what happens on the pitch now and the work that the club's clubs do out in the wider community, but what they are doing as businesses for their workforces, for their, their casual staff, their suppliers, their, everything they do day in, day out. And that's something obviously that Chelsea must be very proud of. And so, Sarah, I guess my question to you would be, what does being LGBT inclusive really mean to a club like Chelsea off the pitch?
Yeah, sure. I think, first of all, sport and football particularly have a very powerful opportunity in demonstrating and promoting inclusivity. And for me, both outside and inside, sport brings people together, work brings people together. And whether you're a spectator or a contributor, no one shouldn't feel welcome. Why should anyone be able to say a certain individual group should or shouldn't be able to take part in something because of their identity or their perceived identity? And I think that's the same at work, and Chelsea is this global iconic brand with millions of fans. And so you've got to use your voice internally and externally to be a really powerful and positive ally for all underrepresented groups. And I sort of would look at that, and the Premier League equality standard looks at all underrepresented groups, and certainly would definitely agree around celebrating the differences. It's not, you shouldn't be discriminating or marginalizing someone who is different and what's important to them or what they feel. And Chelsea has had that real zero tolerance approach to all forms of discrimination and speaking up and speaking out. And I think that's really, really important for the club, because how we present ourselves outside is also how we should be presenting ourselves inside. And I think the strong LGBT network, Chelsea Pride, was established in 2016, and they are absolutely fantastic champions for inclusivity and diversity, and creating a safe space and an environment to enjoy football, to promote that visibility of the LGBT community. And obviously the colleagues within the club work with Chelsea Pride. So again, you want all of those people inside the organisation to feel that it is an inclusive club, and it's not just because it's on the website or in a newspaper, that it is, really genuine. And I think there's so much around the patronage. So somebody like having Claire Rafferty as the patron for Chelsea Pride, she works for the club, but she's a former player, former international footballer. And I think all of that narrative is really important. It's demonstrating by doing, not just by saying. And so when you come to the sort of inside of the club, there's key areas for us that are really important. Data. We've done a lot of work to understand our demographic, to understand the inside of the club, and what do we look like, and are we diverse? And where we aren't diverse, where we aren't as well represented as we should be, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to target that? Recruitment. We spent a lot of time trying to break down the stereotypes of who works in football. There's a perception of football's really for boys, and actually, do you know what, as the HR director for Chelsea, it's really for girls too, and pretty much anybody who wants to take part. And we really want to show a different type of recruitment technique, a different type of way of bringing people into the club. Education, massively important. Obviously, players, our community work, but everybody in the club is going through a 13-part pathway on protected characteristics. So all of these elements are absolutely critical, and that's how you're building that inclusivity inside. And then, as other people have said, allyship, advocacy, communication, all of those things are just critical.
I want to hear in a second about Peniel's experiences of the culture within the women's squad, but I just very quickly want to bounce back to Funky, because what Sarah said reminded me of when I went to work for the FA. When I went to interview, I'd just spent 5 years working for Stonewall, the national LGBT equality charity, where I'd been very comfortable to wear on my sleeve that I'm a gay man. And suddenly coming into the world of football, I was quite nervous about how that would be received. And I asked at interview whether it was a welcoming environment for gay people, and I got a very robust response back about being an organisation which was proud to be diverse and inclusive, and to let them know if I ever experienced discrimination. And Funky, we're 7-8 years on, what does that inclusivity in terms of the workforce look like at at the FA? Do you think it's, really developed as well?
No, definitely it's developed. I mean, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And, certainly for us, like Sarah, data is something that it's a fantastic tool, because there's a reason why data is data, and it tells you something and it never lies. And if you use it and use it well, it can actually inform your plans. And certainly for us as an organisation, at the very top of our organisation, we have a very open, proud, openly gay man who's our chief information officer, who's our sponsor, leads, he's the sort of senior exec sponsor for our LGBTQ plus work. He led our small working committee when we went out to march for Pride last year. He regularly contributes to internal communications, particularly around sort of key moments, whether it's LGBT History Month, whether it's Rainbow Laces. He is a very visible and very proud openly gay man in our organisation, as is the case. Obviously there's intersectionality within people. We must be careful not to box everybody into 9 little boxes. So I would say that certainly as an organisation, the one that I walked into to the one that I'm in now, it is diverse, it is progressive, and we respect those identities. But we also have those internal conversations, because you learn from each other and people's lived experiences. And people's lived experiences in itself is one that people are quite comfortable telling. And through that storytelling, you take everyone on a journey of education. So it's for me, we're on the right road. We need to ensure pathways are there to make sure that, everyone who wants to work at our organisation, as in the FA, they can do so without any perceived barriers. But certainly at the leadership end, like I said, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And, I'm really just very pleased that certainly at this day and age, certainly 2020, 2021, we have an openly senior leader in our organisation.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Peniel, I promise I'm not going to ask you about data. Don't worry. Obviously, you're new to the club. Welcome to Chelsea. I'm really interested to understand a bit more about your experiences of the culture of the women's game. The women's game has a reputation for being inclusive and welcoming, and where people are really comfortable and confident to talk about their identities without fear of prejudice. Why do you think that is? And I guess I'm quite keen to hear about your experiences being new at Chelsea, but also your previous clubs, your international, sort of experience of playing for the women's game. Tell us about your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think in women's football, it has always been, open-minded about homosexuality. I feel like the environment is really open in the locker room, and also the fans. Me personally, I moved from Denmark to Sweden, where in Denmark, I think the environment was a little bit, I was not out when I was in Denmark, and I didn't feel comfortable with it because no one else in the team I was playing in were gay, and no one I knew in the environment were gay. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's important that you don't feel alone about being gay or whatever. And that was what I felt right away when I came to Sweden. That was different. I think they were a little bit further than we were in Denmark at that time. And I felt right away that it was so normalized to be homosexual. So I felt that I could be myself. And I think that's just the most important thing. And I think it is like this in women's football.
It's fascinating, actually. Sorry, Chris, just to sort of pick up on what Peniel said. That point you make about sort of if you feel you're isolated anywhere, not only does it stop you being yourself, but it stops other people being themselves as well. And I think one of the biggest things I've sort of experienced and seen over many years now is that infrastructure, that support, that work that's been done probably from people outside of the game, holding football to account, holding that environment to account, and learning from environments that are further down the track, as you said, Peniel. You go to Sweden and you think, okay, well, this is normal. And my question to you would be, do you think when you're in Denmark, it held you back as a football player because you couldn't be yourself compared to when you went to Sweden?
Yeah, it might did. I didn't think about it at that time, but I think just it's I felt it different. I felt more calm in myself and more secure in myself, that I could be myself 100% and not hiding for myself also, not being honest to myself. It just feels better when you really are, just 100% yourself and trust yourself in what you're doing. And of course, it also reflects the way you play, I think, because of course I was more happy. It was not that I was not happy in Denmark, but I felt a different, absolutely.
And Peter, to what extent is, thinking about Chelsea, for example, is that just down to the culture within the squad, or to what extent does it come from Emma and the team around her, or is it a combination of everything plus the support you get from fans? And we'll come on to talk about, the fan movements in a minute. What is it that's creating that really positive, inclusive environment for all of you?
I think it's just that all the individuals are open-minded. It's not, no one uses like homosexuality or religion or everything like this in a negative way. We look at people as individuals in the way they are. And it comes from the teammates, it comes from the staff, it comes from everything around you. I think it's important also from the highest leaders in a club that they are inclusive, because that affect the people that are under this, how to act and which values to act from. I felt that in Chelsea.
Great, that's good to hear.
Can I
go for it, Sarah. Go for it. Yeah.
A really quick thing. I was reading on Stonewall's website that 43% of LGBT people don't feel welcome at public sporting events, and I think that's such a disappointment that we haven't broken that kind of way that people act and behave. But I have to say, having been at the women's matches at Kingsmeadow, wow, I think they'd have a completely different view if they came to Kingsmeadow. It is such a brilliant event. It's, watching the women's team play, they have their own stadium, is absolutely fantastic. And I think it's, it would be a great place for people to come and enjoy sport in a public environment and feel very welcome, and that to be a really positive kind of maybe change of their perceptions as well. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, I know we've got a lot of women's game fans joining us today, but definitely we want to encourage more and more people to come to Kingsmeadow. It's a totally different experience, and I always love going down there. So let's tickets are on Sarah. She'll get everyone into the game. I'm going to be in trouble now. But I want. I want to get back to that bit about the fans. They're so important to all of the work that the club does. And Sarah alluded to Chelsea Pride, which is the club's LGBT plus fan group. They inform a lot of what the club does around LGBT. They share their experiences, the good and the bad, and they're there really championing LGBT equality. And Sarah mentioned Claire Rafferty is one of the co-patrons for Chelsea Pride, and the other co-patron is Mr. Lasso. Graham, why do you think these groups are so important? In an ideal world, we probably wouldn't need them, but why did you want to be patron? What do you think the relevance and importance of them is?
Yeah, I think it's always good to have a group. So whether things are going well or not, I think it's good to have a group, because you get feedback from people and you get their own experiences, their own perspectives. So I think whether things are going well or not, I think it's important to have representational groups of different communities. For me, it becomes really important because it's a signpost for people. It's a for those people, as Pernille says, that maybe don't have that confidence or support around them in their own lives, to see that sort of light and have that sort of as a guide to sort of getting into watching football and feel. I think Funky said about a safe space. I mean, for me, that's the next big thing. It shouldn't be about a safe space. Every space should be safe, and that's the next. I think the next chapter is that people don't have to sort of work under an umbrella to feel safe and to feel welcome. But I really feel that this, the Chelsea Pride and other groups as well, they have such a great role to play, because they're the ones that are sort of breaking through the barriers and also being very honest in terms of the feedback. Sarah says about obviously, making sure you get that information back from people. That's the only way we can learn whether what we're doing as a club is working or not, how we can improve that for our supporters. And having groups, I think, that have different perspectives is really important too. But again, that relies on that trust. It's all built on good foundations, because you need that openness, that trust, that willingness to know that you're not getting things right all the time. And for me, I'm sure Pernille might acknowledge this as well, as a professional footballer, we live in that environment, because you could play the best game you've ever played and it's still not going to be good enough. You're still going to have made mistakes. And unless you get that feedback and you get that honesty and you continually try to improve your performance, you'll never get to the levels that we've been both fortunate enough to get to. And I think you can take that element and apply that to LGBT plus fan experience as we continue to sort of move along and hopefully look back in the next 5 years and say, okay, well, we can tick these things off our list now, and the list is getting smaller and smaller by the time we get to people just feeling completely at ease with who they are and not being judged by other people.
Pernille, I guess you haven't really had much of an opportunity to engage with the Chelsea fan groups yet, but what do you see as the relevance of groups like Chelsea Pride, who are that representative voice, who are trying to make sure that different communities have a platform and feel welcome at the game? Do you see them as important?
Yeah, of course. I think it's important that you feel a part of something and you don't feel alone in things. And of course, stuff like this helps with that. Now, you said I haven't experienced so much with the fans in Chelsea, but yesterday we finally had them back. I think we had 700. It was amazing. And I can't wait to get more on the stadium. I think that's also what women's football has, that the fans in women's football, they just love the football, and they don't care who you are and what sexuality you have or what color you have. And I think that's something that's amazing about women's football.
Thank you for that. It's really great to talk about how far we've come and to celebrate the good work that the game is doing. But Funky mentioned before about the diversity of the LGBT plus community, and it's very easy for us to bundle the whole community together and say everybody feels included. But we know that particularly for transgender people, they still feel that there's a lot of barriers to them taking part, a lot of discrimination against trans people. But Funky, I remember when I worked for you at the FA back in, I think it was 2014, the FA published its policy on trans participation, and the FA has always worked very closely with experts like Stonewall, Gendered Intelligence, Football versus Homophobia, Just a Ball Game. But do you think football is becoming more inclusive for trans people? We know we've got a long way to go, but what's your feeling about the direction we're headed in for trans participation across the game?
I think definitely this is one area that the whole game needs to perhaps collaborate a bit better on. I think it's very, we've come from a place where we've lumped all identities together around LGBTQ+. And I think whilst that's great, what you've done is actually not take into consideration differences. There are differences within the LGBTQ+ community. And I think the trans prism in terms of gender expression and gender identity, I think there still needs to be more conversations around that, particularly around the whole sort of inclusion, education. I think people are not totally comfortable. We need to do the work that we started on the journey around LGBT inclusion 5 years ago and apply that model, maybe look at it differently in terms of the adaptations you need to make, and actually go on a journey of change around trans inclusion. And even more so than ever than now, because there's so much misinformation, toxicity around headline grabbing, negative sort of perceptions and stereotype, that if we are true to the game is for everybody, then clearly we need to make sure that we don't leave our trans community behind, but also create and make sure that there are safe places and that those spaces is reflective equally in terms of their aspirations and what they want. You know, to come out as trans is already, I would say, you know, certainly from conversations I have, it's not an easy thing to do, you know, and whilst being LG, you can pass. In the trans community, it's very difficult to pass. And I think we need to kind of educate ourselves in one, being curious and understanding what does trans inclusion mean? And if you don't know, then there are obviously signposts and organisation. Our policy includes, but there's no guarantee that actually everyone works on that basis, that, you know, the game is for everybody, irrespective of your gender identity or your gender expression. And there's more work to be done in that space for sure.
And Sarah, how does that reflect what not just Chelsea, but, you know, clubs across the you know, top flight leagues are doing to want to be employers of choice for LGBT and T people?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think the subject of intersectionality, I think we've got to be honest that, you know, the data that we have today, we didn't have. And then mining into that data shows you all the different people that are in the organization. But there's also, I would say, people that are reluctant to say that they are one thing or another thing because that's a personal choice, or because they have a fear. And I don't think that's anything to do with our organisation. I think that's more of a societal issue. From an employer of choice perspective, you know, it's about fairness. It's about making sure that you, as I was saying earlier, you change the stereotype. So there's a particular stereotype around football. It's not true. Football actually within the clubs and now the fan base, etc., is really different. Probably more recently, and probably it's more overt now than it ever has been before. We're talking about, you know, diversity and inclusion every day. So perhaps that wasn't every day before. I've only been in football for 3 years, but I've been in other sectors that are comparable. And I think the challenge around employer of choice is changing perception, and there are perceptions around football. So some of the things that we're doing are really about targeted recruitment campaigns to open up and say, these are the roles that we have at Chelsea. Number one, people only think about roles that are related to the physicality of football, so coaches, performance, etc. I've got people in hospitality, we've got health club, we've got finance, HR, legal. So there's a huge range of departments, which means you can bring in a huge range of different people with different experiences and different skills. And that's, you know, as soon as you start to do that, it just starts to create a different culture for the organization. And that's definitely what we've been really focused on. So I think for me, it starts at recruitment, and then how do you help and really positively put forward what the culture of the organization is like, and you can actually express that and have a narrative to that. So when I do recruitment now, when I sit in interviews, a lot of people ask me, which is very refreshing and really positive, well, tell me about equality, diversity and inclusion, tell me about sustainability, tell me about corporate social responsibility, a lot more intelligent questions than any sector 10 years ago. And, you know, and people are really, they expect their organizations to have a narrative, to be able to verbalize what they think and what they feel about, you know, discrimination. And I think for Chelsea, what's really positive is that we have stepped forward and said zero tolerance to discrimination. And so you've got to make sure that internally you're really reinforcing that message. But it has to be through that whole employee life cycle. And as Funky says, you know, there is so much more that needs to be done. And we are, you know, we have so much more education and so much more information. You know, let's go back. It's not a very long time ago when women were not particularly prevalent in the workplace. I mean, you don't have to go back many, many years, but that changed. And now, you know, we're still, you know, having those discussions and debates, but more and more different communities and different people are entering the workplace, and that's just becoming as it should be. And I think the more we do that, the more we educate, the more we talk, the more we listen, to people who've got different perspectives and different points of view. I think that allyship and the advocacy is really, really important, because, you know, Peniel's talked about in football, it's very difficult to be the only one, the only woman, the only person from an ethnic minority background, the only person who identifies as LGBT. So I think if you can create really strong networks and communities, then I think that makes it a much better employment experience or employee life cycle.
And it's so wonderful to hear you and Funky talking about all the positives that are going on across the game as an employer. But what frustrates me is you've only got to look at what was on the main news this morning about the horrendous behaviour of fans at certain games across the weekend when players took the knee. And that's the reputational stuff that sticks. And that is what people think the game is. And that's not just about what happened this weekend, but it's also about homophobic, biphobic and transphobic and other kinds of discriminatory language and behaviour in the stands. And so I'd be keen to hear from Graham and Peniel, what more do you think needs to be done because the game is working so hard to try and get fans to understand their behaviour better, you know, what's acceptable, what's unacceptable, and the impact that it has. But there's still a whole lot of problems. What more, I'll start with Graham, do you think the game needs to do to tackle it in the stands?
I'm going to pass you over to Peniel. She can answer this question first.
I was happy that you start.
I mean, Peniel, do you hear much discriminatory and abusive language from the stands in the women's game? We know it happens a lot at men's games, but I don't know much about, you know, your experiences of it in the women's game.
No, I haven't heard that a lot, actually. I think it's really different, the fan culture also from men's and women's football, and also the fact that the men's football is so big compared to women's and other sports. And there is a lot of different football fans in men's football. I think it's difficult to say what to do to change it. I think it's important just to do something and to act. Doing campaigns, also like the responsibility of players, everyone, also fans that are not like this, like trying to create a different fan culture, like by saying stop if they hear something. But yeah, and also if every time the players, they have to be stubborn also, like keep on working against it. When fans are homophobes, they have to like stand up for each other. The players have to show that it's not okay also, like they do now.
Do you think there would be if there was some abuse, do you think the response from the women's game would be really robust and united and act very quickly? You don't think they would just sort of pretend they didn't hear it and get on with it? It seems to me there's much more motivation and solidarity in defending people.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know actually, but because I haven't experienced it, but I guess so. Maybe also that's why I don't hear so much. But yeah, I think it's important. Huh?
It's great. It's great that that you haven't experienced that. It's almost like I'm fishing. Oh, please, God, please tell me of a time where someone was abused, discriminated against, just so we can deal with it. No, that's great. That's a really big plus.
I believe that Chelsea was the first Premier League club to introduce re-education for fans as an optional part of the sanction for discriminatory behaviour. So let's say, for example, a fan got banned for 3 years for anti-Semitic abuse. They might have the option, depending on the nature of the incident, of attending education to reduce the length of that ban. And Graham, I remember when I worked for the FA, you and I delivered player education as part of the sanction. So, I mean, and I know you're a great advocate for education. Do you think it needs to be more, fan proactive education, or is it the re-education bit? How do we get fans to understand those messages better?
Well, I'm a great believer in. We've all spoken about education. I'm a great believer in sort of punishing the crime, understanding the context of where it's come from, trying to understand that, and then trying to help somebody overcome that prejudice through educating them. So, I think for me, I would always want to give somebody a chance to learn why they shouldn't say something rather than just throw the book at them. Because I don't think that's necessarily sends out the right message. I think so much of what we're dealing with, and I think we've all mentioned it, is sort of, historic stereotypes, social upbringing, all sorts of different things that contribute to this ignorance. And therefore you've got to sort of work out where it's coming from, deal with the punishment, because I think that does send out some messaging to people, and it certainly sends out the right messages in terms of what an organization or a sport will tolerate and what it won't tolerate. That's really important to set those boundaries, but equally to give people the chance to put their hand up and say, do you know what, I realize now why I shouldn't have said that. I didn't think about it that way. I please give me another chance. And I've always, I've made some big mistakes during my football career, that I got punished for. And I've always been taught ever since I was a young boy by my parents that be honest, deal with the consequences of what you've done, and then you can move on. And I think that's really important to make sure that despite maybe a lot of external pressure from other people, I think it's important to keep that context. And I think that will make the sort of the transition from, where we were to where we are and where we are to where we want to be, I think a bit smoother, and we'll take many more people along with us on that journey.
And one of the things Peniel mentioned was campaigns, and that's brings me neatly on to actually talking about the Rainbow Laces campaign, which is why we're here today. And Funky, I'd like to come to you first. You've been involved in the Rainbow Laces campaign since the very early days. What impact do you think it's having across both the pro and the grassroots game as well? Because it's really important that we remember, the massive area that is the grassroots game. What impact do you think it's having?
I think certainly in the latter 3 years, it's had immeasurable impact. And I say that because, every start of the campaign, it just gets better and better in terms of the amount of support and allyship for it. For us, we started making sure that we're both connecting in with the adult game as well as youth football. And it's amazing how young people just love what the campaign stands for. And for them, because through their lives, actually some of this is not an issue necessarily, and they really want to get behind it and support it. 5 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. And I think, again, it goes back to this word in terms of actually normalizing the playing field in a way that this is a great opportunity to demonstrate the values of your club, the culture of your club, showing allyship, making a difference, making sure that your teammates are supported if they're struggling. It's just been immeasurable. That said, I think success because of the amount of take-up and the amount of activation both within the professional game, right from the obviously role models in terms of our sort of day-to-day national profile players, right through to Hackney Marshes, or your sort of real down to earth kind of grassroots. And I think the challenge for the game now is how can we continue to innovate? How can we continue to be creative in the conversations this campaign does have, and how do we take it to the next level? But certainly from my perspective, as a tool, if I had this 5 years ago or 10 years ago, we wouldn't be where we're at now, but we are where we're at now, and it has made an impact, and it continues to grow and grow. And actually both ends of the game, both the professional game and the grassroots game, it's nice that we've got this ecosystem of real outpouring of support, outpouring of allyship and support. And more importantly, people are taking a personal stand, they're educating themselves. If it means it gives people the confidence to call things out in terms of, homophobes or anyone that's been transphobic or biphobic, then the campaign has been a success. But like I said, we're not unless on our laurels, and it's how do we amplify that in terms of the next level.
I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned young people, because one of the things I do at Chelsea is some education. Well, I do a briefing with the academy players for Rainbow Laces, and it always really amuses me that I'll say to the boys, so what do you know about the campaign? And they kind of roll their eyes like, why are you even talking to us about this? Because they learn about it at school. They have the visibility. It's, you know, it's not perfect, but the culture is much, much more inclusive. And they're going to be that next generation of players going into the game, hopefully sharing those messages. But I wanted to, obviously, that's all the stuff that's happening on the pitch. Sarah, do you think that the Rainbow Laces campaign has a place within the clubs as businesses as well?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm really sad we're not working in Stamford Bridge this year, because last year everybody had their Rainbow Laces lanyard. I had hundreds of them in my office, and we had a lot of people coming in, and people were just wanted to be associated, wanted to show support. And I think the generational thing is a really important point, you know. Younger people coming into the workplace now, younger people in football, you know, that are playing, and the kids in the academies, etc. Their perception of different people is very different. So, you know, every generation is more enlightened, if that's the right word, but certainly more knowledgeable than the last one. And I sincerely want the work that we're doing now to significantly change future generations. And I think the other thing that's happened as well is that we've come to understand and acknowledge that there are many different phobic and hate behaviours, and we've all been standing up against all of them. And I think that's really important, because it starts to say, it's sort of, I suppose, Funky calls it normalization, but I think celebrating difference. If you're saying that actually, look, there are all these different people and they're all made up in a different way, and there's no right or wrong, it's just individuals, then I think that generational change is so important, and you can see it coming through. And I think that's the bit that's going to be really exciting, is when we're all drinking cocoa and going to bed at 8:30, it'll be a much more enlightened.
I'm already doing that.
I was going to say, yeah.
I better get in there before you did, Chris. Yeah.
I'm not giving away my secrets. Yeah, you know, I think that is going to really change it. And I think there's also demand as well. And I hope that really does support actually some of the stuff that was said about the trans community, because I think people really want to learn about stuff, and they're less scared to ask questions. I think a lot of people are quite scared because they don't want to offend somebody. They don't want to say the wrong thing. So they've sort of not really approached it or maybe asked things. And I think people are a lot more open, and people are more open about their own challenges, whoever they are as well. And I think all of that rolled up together really actually creates a very different and better society.
We look forward to seeing how it continues to roll out and get bigger and better for the whole of the game. We've got just about over 10 minutes left, and I just wanted to take a few questions that were submitted to us before the session. And the first one is for Pernille. It's quite a long question, so brace yourself. So Pernille, how does it feel to be an inspirational role model for so many LGBTQI plus people, not only in sport? From my own experience, I can tell that representation does matter and it makes a difference. Having you to look up to gave me the courage and strength to accept my sexuality and therefore myself. So thank you so much for that. Ooh, gives me goosebumps. Well, I guess we haven't really talked about, you know, role modeling, and, you know, Pernille, for, you know, that tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of women, you know, women and girls, and, you know, boys and men, you'll be a role model. And yeah, tell us about, how does that make you feel?
Yeah,
must be great.
Yeah, it's great to hear this, Christian. I think, yeah, when I was younger, I maybe missed some role models that was homosexual, and also just like living with it as it's nothing special. For me, it's important that I'm just myself, and I'm not like hiding anything. From when I'm talking about myself, when I'm on social media, I show pictures with my girlfriend like I would do if I had a boyfriend, and I'm acting in the not in private, also normally with my girlfriend. But it's also like I don't want to do something that I don't feel genuine. And I think maybe that's what a lot of people think it's nice that I'm just myself, and I'm embracing to be homosexual, not being like embarrassed about it. Yeah.
Graham, hard as it must be to believe, there must be a few people out there who think you're a role model as well. And actually, in all seriousness, being one of the co-patrons of Chelsea Pride and being an ally and an advocate for the LGBT plus community, that does make you a role model. Do you have a sense of the importance of players and former players as role models for fans, for the wider community?
I think once you have a profile, I think there's a point in which you recognize you have a responsibility as well that goes with that. So, I was fortunate enough to get the rewards of, becoming a professional footballer and, playing for Chelsea for 12 years and Blackburn, Southampton, and then England for 6 years. So, whether you like it or not, you've then got responsibilities and you become a role model. And there'll always be, none of us set out to be role models, but, and there's a lot of people that sort of say, well, why should I be a role model? Well, if you get a sponsorship deal for wearing a branded sort of boot, and you're happy to take the money, then you should be happy to accept you're a role model because you're being paid because they think you're going to sell the boots. so take responsibility for yourself as well. And so therefore it comes with the territory. I think some people are suited to that more than others. So I don't think you should hold people, to going beyond where they're comfortable. Pernille's point is absolutely right about being yourself and being genuine. But I take great pride in the fact that I'm able to support things that I believe in. I support things in public. I support things in private. I don't feel I have to share everything about myself in public. I think that that there's a sort of a needle, and everyone's different on that in terms of what they share. But yeah, I mean, I've always had values, always had principles, and having the opportunity to stand up and support those, even if they're not directly related to me. I spent all my life with this reputation by certain sections of football, and it wasn't true. So in a way, it made my life very difficult, because if people said that I was gay, it was very difficult for me to say, no, look, I'm really offended by that. I'm not gay, but I'm really offended by that. It just made the argument quite complicated. But no different to Pernille. I was very alone in that experience. Nobody came up to me and said, look, how does that make you feel? And where do you sit in discussing that, defending yourself, but also supporting the people around you that you love. So it was a big challenge for me in many ways. But look, I think I would always do, whether I had a profile or not, I'd always do what I do out of principle. The fact that I've got a profile, Pernille's got a profile, we're very fortunate that we're able to maybe reach more people and offer that sort of support, albeit from a distance.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's really important. As a member of the community, I can say that role modeling, whether you're a part of the community or not, is hugely important to us. So thank you.
So am I a role model to you?
Not strictly, but you do some good things every now and again. So.
Damn, I was hoping I'd.
Yeah, well, I know all the bad stories, and I'm happy to share them with the audience. So you better watch it. You better watch it.
I think your connection's going.
How convenient. So I said we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And one of the other questions that's come through is and this will be for Sarah, and then Funky, you might have an FA view as well about what you've done. What is the club's response to the huge number of supporters that left troll comments on Rainbow Laces this weekend on social media? Should the club be working harder to delete those hurtful comments or block users that post opinions that do not align to the club? So obviously, Chelsea, Sarah, what does the club do? And Funky, I'm sure that there's been some negative backlash at the FA as well for Rainbow Laces. Sarah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the club won't be dissuaded from doing the right thing and doing what it feels is the right thing to support and be that ally and that advocate, whatever the situation. And I think the other point to make is it's against the law to discriminate against people. So that's a really important point. So we'll support and we'll take positive action. I think in terms of specifically on social media, we do block and report wherever we can. We encourage social media users to do the same. We do see other people who are posting also challenge, which is great, and say, hang on a minute, that's not appropriate, that's not the right sort of narrative or context, etc. So I think those are important parts of it. I also think we have to work with social media companies, because it's not just trolling in football, it's not just trolling about rainbow laces, it's trolling of individuals, which I think is awful, that somebody's purpose is to upset somebody else, and I think it's like bullying, or it is bullying. So I think, you know, social media companies have to help us as well to see what more we can do to try and manage this, and really stop that sort of behaviour and that sort of narrative.
Funky, does the FA have similar experiences when Rainbow Laces weekend kicks off? Lots of negative. You know, obviously there's all the positive stuff, but also the negative stuff that comes through on social media.
Yeah, I mean, I think any organisation, whether it's a club, whether it's ourselves, you know, if you're an organisation that's driven by principles and values, and you support something that the haters hate, they will always pile in and express a view which is not sort of in tandem with your own values. And everything that Sarah's just said, you know, we will take those measures. But, you know, but what's also very interesting year on year is actually that sort of ecosystem conversation that goes on between people calling things out. And I've seen more of it of late. Certainly this year, I've seen people really kind of challenging back. Of course, it's not great to see and those comments, and you know that those comments will come. But actually, I think certainly from the noise that I hear, it's not. I like the fact that they're challenged back. But I think the work that collectively football needs to do is to work with those social media channels, whether that's kind of Facebook, Twitter, and to have a much more coordinated way of working with them, so that, you know, when things need to be taken down, they can be taken down. Interestingly enough, actually, the threshold for football is slightly higher compared to for those organisations. In that way, it makes it really difficult and challenging for us to take things down immediately. That said, those conversations are happening, and Kick It Out have been quite instrumental in terms of continuing that dialogue at that level.
Thank you, Funky. We've literally got about 2 minutes left. Just very quickly, Graham and Peniel, how do you have to deal with that stuff on social media, the negative stuff? Do you just ignore it, or do you challenge it, or, you know, is it something you have to deal with?
Yeah, there were a few. There will always be haters, especially when you speak up about your opinion. But yeah, I mostly ignore them, and focus on the positive, because actually there are more positive than negative, and often I see actually some of the positive people, they comment on the negative, like standing up. So I think that's amazing. Yeah, and
I agree. I get, you know, every so often, but I just don't like to give those people oxygen. To be honest. So I think that's my sort of first point, is that, you know, as soon as you start engaging, you're in danger of things escalating. And as Peniel says, and both Funky and Sarah, I think that the fact that now there are people that are more likely to sort of get in and defend you against that comment sort of thing, and support you in those comments, I think is probably the best way, and more responsibility to the platforms to get control of some of those things that are said.
Yeah. And hopefully the more we have these conversations, the more people will, you know, be supportive and challenge each other. And yeah, year on year, this should just become a more positive, inclusive industry for everybody, including LGBT plus people. I'm really, really sad to say I've got to draw a line there. That is the end of the hour. Peniel, Graham, Funky, Sarah, I cannot thank you enough for joining us for this. Yeah, I wish all of you the very best for the rest of the year. I'm very excited about what we've all got ahead across the game in 2021. So thank you very much for joining us this evening, and thank you to everybody who has signed up and listened in, and for the questions we got. Sorry we couldn't get through all of them. This will be available to listen back to. There will be a link somewhere that appears. I've no idea how that stuff happens, but thank you very much, everyone. It's been lovely chatting with you. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks,
all right. Happy Rainbow Laces.
Thank you.